Welcome back. This is in continuation with this role of independent system operator. So this is a small description about how independent system operator handles the transmission constraints. Most of the times in power systems, we do experience right now, even in our country also, there is always a shortage of the transmission services in our country also, because transmission lines are fixed. Everybody wants to utilize those transmission services, so there is always a demand for transmission services. Unlike the generations and demands which can be erected at any place, transmission lines or transmission services cannot be offered by everyone, because it is just like interconnecting. So if everybody cannot lay his own road. If he wants to travel from Hyderabad to some other city, everybody cannot lay his own road every time. He used to employ only a common road, right? And that road is to be maintained by the government or some organization. So road is fixed, so everybody purchases a vehicle and travels to the same road. So in the same way, transmission lines are also, there is always a tough competition to acquire the transmission services all the time. So that's why if you consider the entire power system, transmission constraints are one of the most important constraints which we experience in the power system. Now, an independent system operator in the restructured power market basically must handle the transmission constraints. So how he handles the transmission constraints is one big thing. Now, let's see how he handles the transmission constraints. The first thing is, irrespective of the restructuring model, whether it is bilateral contracts model or pool-co model or hybrid model, independent system operator must manage the service of mitigating the transmission constraints. It is an ancillary service as listed by FERC. FERC has critically listed this handling of transmission constraints as one of the ancillary services that must be provided by independent system operator in case of requirements. So what does this handling of transmission constraints do actually mean? If at all, if there are any problems in the transmission sector, ISO must come forward to solve those type of problems. So a few of the things which are included in this particular ancillary services, it includes billing and procedures. So let us suppose if there is any mitigation of it, if at all if there is any mitigation of any constraints. Let us suppose independent system operator is mitigating the constraints. So what is the cost of mitigating that constraints, and what is the expenditure incurred in mitigating those services, and what is the accounting procedure? All. So, and who is mitigating that one? ISO will take, just like a leader, he will identify, he will, let us suppose, he will push up some player to mitigate the transmission constraints. He might not be going there and mitigating the transmission constraints. He will push some player to go there and mitigate the constraints. So let us suppose if ISO is there is a transmission constraint. Now he will ask some player, some X player, to mitigate this transmission constraint. So for this mitigating this transmission constraint, so there will be some sort of expenditure incurred, right? So ISO lays down the billing and accounting procedures, and he pays those participants who offered this mitigation services. So this job is to be done by ISO. So it doesn't mean that ISO must always go there and mitigate the transmission constraints. He must allow the other participants to mitigate it, and it pays accordingly. So, and one more thing is nothing but ISO will ensure that proper economic signals, which basically encourages the efficient use and motivate the investment in resources capable of alleviating constraints. So the first thing is, you shouldn't allow these constraints to happen. If you allow them, then you must give very clear indications that if anybody helps in sorting out these transmission concerns, they will be awarded accordingly. So if you give the type of economic signals, so the first thing is, if anybody creates a transmission constraint, then he will be penalized. If anybody helps us in mitigating the transmission constraint, he will be awarded. So if you give out these clear signals, economic signals, then everybody will be maintaining the stability of the system, and he will maintain the efficient utilization use of transmission lines. So that job is to be done by independent system operator. And next is, this is regarding the transmission constraints. The other thing which independent system operator does is emergency conditions. Emergency condition is that, let us suppose there is a sudden decrease in demand, or let us suppose sudden outage of any generator. So what happens is it is some sort of emergency condition, because a day before itself, you take day ahead markets. A day before itself, you have committed for this type of generation, for this generation, from this generator to the demand. So if that is the case, if there is a sudden outage of generator, or let us suppose there is a sudden shortfall in demand, maybe because of some unwanted conditions, or maybe because of the natural conditions. Let us suppose there is an imbalance between the generation and supply, instantaneous imbalance between the generation and supply. That type of thing is basically considered as an emergency condition. So, independent system operator must take care of these emergency conditions. So, in emergency conditions, the system reliability is an absolute responsibility of independent system operators. So, during these emergency conditions, the ISO is having the fullest authority. He has the complete authority whether to commit and dispatch some or all system resources or components. So, he has authority to commit and dispatch. And at this position, let us suppose there is 3 players, x1, x2, x3. Their capacity is 100, 100, 100. But unfortunately, they have been shortlisted as 50, 100, and this is their capacity, but this is their finalized bid, right? And they are supposed to provide 200 megawatts to a user. Now, suddenly, let us suppose if this is fallback. Let us suppose the generator X3 has experienced a shutdown suddenly. So, ISO can allow this X1 to increase to 100 because this is an emergency condition, because there is a sudden change in demand and supply. So, during this period, the ISO has the and to curtail the loads to maintain system security. Let us suppose if he is not capable of providing this one, then automatically he will ask this guy to go to 150 megawatts only. So ISO has the full authority during the emergency conditions. Let us suppose if this guy is not able to provide and use, then automatically ISO can contact some other service providers, so that those services basically they are available under the ISO request. See, to make these services available, ISO contracts with service providers so that these services are available. So when a service provider is called by the ISO, provider is basically paid an extra amount to cover the operating costs. And these costs are to be borne by either independent system operator or the included parties. This is the way how emergency conditions are handled by independent system operator. So apart from this, what are the additional tasks? As I have already mentioned, he is supposed to maintain the metering, implement functions. All jobs are to be done by independent system operator. And during this metering, he collects all the data from the metered buses, calibrates the meters, verifies meter data through tools. So different tools are available. State estimators are there. Parallel metering may be done by other entities. He must allow some other entities to meter the data at regular intervals to support the independent system operator. And after all the contracts which have taken place in the real time, so the ISO posts the system conditions, including injections and withdrawals at each node of the system for each hour. So because he has the access to the transmission system, through all the transmission lines, what is the ATC and how much power is being included and how much power is being withdrawn through each and every node in the transmission system, that data will be provided by the ISO to maintain all the metering and the settlement data generated within its control area and between control areas. So all the data, whatever the financial settlements, etc., that data will be maintained by the independent system operator. So the conclusion is that independent system operator, he maintains a balance of the grids. He controls the dispatch of plants and ensures that the loads match the generation resources. So doing all this job, we feel that independent system operator must maintain his neutrality and act as an independent entity in the restructured power markets. I hope now you are able to list the objectives of independent system operator in restructured power systems. You are able to list the ancillary services which are provided by the independent system operator, and also you are able to describe the transmission constraints and emergency conditions and how they are exclusively handled by independent system operator. These are the lecture level questions. Thank you.